Moran here with Senior Housing Forum, and I have become such a big fan of doing video interviews. It gives you really a chance to meet people, see what they're like, hear their voice, hear their passion. And I think it's the passion that I really love more than anything else. So I got an email a couple of weeks ago saying, hey, this is a story you probably ought to do. And so I am today talking to Joe, Carella, is that right?
Carella. I even struggle with it, so don't worry.
Okay, and you are the founder, CEO of?
I'm the executive director of the Scandinavian Charitable Society of Greater Boston, and we run a traditional assisted living and cultural center, and then we're the hub of many organizations that we can talk about later in the Newton, Boston.
So why don't we actually, and you've written a book, right?
Yes, which surprisingly a couple, one 20 years ago and one recently.
Okay.
I'm not a writer, so I'll go off and say that. This is just one of those things that was never on a punch list, but it's something that had to be done, I guess.
Ah, terrific. So let's actually just go back to the beginning. How did you get in this business?
Well, I was a typical teenage boy. I was very immature, but I wanted to play. I had goals. I was very competitive with all my brothers. And I wanted to play college football. And like my brothers, we were the strongest in the high school. So, and I'm going to put this in perspective, and it's about the effect it had on me.
Gotcha.
The day I had a freak accident, and the day before, and it was in February. So if you understand getting ready for football, I was squatting over 400 pounds, benching over 200, where my goal was to get to 300 before June. And I had a crazy accident where I tore my ACL. And at the time, I had no idea how serious that was because I was a running back. And I went to the hospital, and the doctor says, you need to have it fixed. And I was so grateful that I didn't break my leg because I didn't understand that would have probably been better. And they told me at the hospital that the pediatric ward was closed and that I was going to go to the geriatric ward. I had no idea what that meant, but I was a cocky kid. I was studying, having a good time. School was not that important to me, though I knew I had to go off to college. But again, I was very immature. So to make a long story short, I was put in this geriatric unit with two other men in my room. I had a view of the hallway. And ironically, my grandfather would die in that same room a year later. And at the end of I was there for 4 days, 4 nights. At the end of the fourth day, I begged the director of nursing to get me out. My blood pressure was 230 over 180, and I was a completely changed person. They finally put me into pediatrics, and they told me it was open all week. It was a mistake. And in a sense, I felt like, okay. And then I remember having a view of the morgue in pediatrics, and I was going to parochial school. So I was looking up saying, stop. I know what I need to do. I have no idea. I'm not the smart person in the room, but I'll figure it out. So from then on, I had direction. It's not a passion. It's like my wife was talking to me the other day. Oh, you've got this passion or calling. And I tell people, unless you understand what a calling is, it's almost it's like a curse. You can't escape it. You either get off the track, and if you do, you get back on. And that's exactly what's taken place over the years. Crazy things have happened to me. I wrote about it in the book, where wrong telephone calls were made by someone else who decided to talk to a stranger. And that stranger ended up being a mentor down the road, setting me up on my first foundation and my first research trip, which led to the first book. And then 20 years later, the second book gets done because people said you need to talk about community-centered living. So it's about human connections that occur, the journey in life, and I believe it should never stop when you move into any type of housing facility. So that's a long answer.
I agree. It's a great story, and as you were telling it, it sort of took me back into I was in a place when I was in my late 20s where I was really, really stuck. And I answered the phone because my admin was doing something else, but it was a call I shouldn't have answered that completely transformed my direction. And if I hadn't answered that call, it would have been, the map of my life would have been completely different. So you're absolutely right. I get that, and they're amazing, passions, all those kinds of things. So let's move on and let's talk a little bit about what's the right term I want to use? Community living? Is that right?
Nope. Community-centered living is the philosophy. It's what you wrap
Okay.
yourself around. Now, 20 years ago, when I did the research in Scandinavia, and the reason that got published and written was because my American friends and colleagues, when I got back, said to me, "Oh, you can't do this. That's Scandinavia. This is America. They pay high taxes." So back then, it was about me proving what the Scandinavians were doing, but I was using American research. So 20 years ago, I was focusing on the individual person. So I was looking at these principles called residential reality. 20 years ago, it was about the nursing home room or any room, making it residential. Stop putting 2, 3 people, 4 people in a room. That doesn't work. So I was focusing on that. And then I had autonomy. We have to promote autonomy, which now is a buzzword, but I was focusing on the individual person. And then at the end, I said, well, you need to maintain our lifestyle. Again, I was focusing on the individual person. So 20 years later, and I knew about community-centered living, but I didn't wrap my arms around it 20 years ago because I was busy trying to look at the design of the nursing homes, assisted living, that it had to be residential. But what's important to those 3 concepts 20 years later, they're still legit, they're still important, but they're different. They surround and they're part of. And 20 years ago, individually, those 3 principles don't work without the others. But now what's at the core of this is community-centered living, and that's simply developing housing to gather people, not to market the place or the facility. It's about gathering. We need to stop building something to house people. That's institutional thinking. So what has to happen is you have to find out, and I'm actually working on a playbook for this. Every city and town across the country has to look at their needs. If you're a developer or an administrator, or an organization that is in this industry, you need to look at your place and say, what is the need of the community? Because you have to gather people, because you and I talked about our journey, those accidents that occur, the people you meet. Well, that stops when we move into housing. It's almost like a disconnect from the community because we're not connecting anymore. The people living in facilities today think everyone across the street is the outside community. And that's the thing that has to be broken down. And I can share the crazy miracles that happen.
So when you talk about, think of the needs of the community, you're talking about the broad marketplace community and not just the senior living, what's inside the senior living community. Is that correct?
Exactly. But here's the thing. When we have a cultural center, and when I was hiring director, I kept saying, you need to have programs to introduce the best of the Nordic culture. But I don't want you thinking about the residents. They're not part of this. It's all about the community. But what I didn't say is the residents are part of that community. It's a way of thinking. You have to create gathering opportunities, and you can't limit yourself. You can't be putting the Disney gloves on and saying, well, we're going to protect the residents. It's not about that, because people in their 80s and 90s, and I understand this when I speak to my kids, they're like, they're trying to protect me. It's like nothing to protect. I've seen what you've seen, and we do the same thing with our seniors. They've seen it better than we have. So the needs are more about what do the individual people in the community need. What's ironic is when I wrote community-centered living, I was so focused on gathering people, colleagues and professionals started sending me articles after reading the book about isolation. Like, oh, this isn't a solution for dealing with isolation, not only inside the 4 walls of our facilities, but in the community. So to give you the impact of what community-centered living does, if you become a gathering place, if you develop a project, whatever, life, community, nursing homes, assisted living, if you consider yourself a gathering place first, and you look at the needs of your city or town, then you start thinking about the housing afterwards. People come.
So
and I can tell you,
what you're describing, if I get this right, what you're describing is maybe Starbucks. I'm not sure I like Starbucks as a model, because I think it's sort of transitory, but maybe you're talking about the small town diner where everybody comes to get the gossip and the news every day, right?
No, that's one tiny aspect of it. It's
okay.
Whatever this town needs. And it's funny that you said Starbucks. Well, let me just quickly tell you, we're a small traditional assisted living, right? 40 apartments. We have over 2,000 visitors a month that walk through our front door. That's not even counting family and friends of the residents. Over 2,000 sets of eyes that are looking at us all the time, and the impact that it has on me and the rest of the community, hopefully we get to it, is amazing. Now, what I'm thinking about, and we have a cafe, a pop-up cafe. So when you mentioned Starbucks, I was in, I don't know, about a year or so ago, I was in on a Saturday. And this is a pop-up cafe. We have volunteers come in, they have smoked salmon and shrimp, coffee, and baked goods. And I happened to be here on a Saturday. I don't remember why. And I saw a neighbor. And I said, well, what are you doing here? And she said to me, oh, I'm here to meet a friend. I mean, they weren't visiting anyone in the place. They were meeting our neighbor in our facility, which is, it's hard to think of your place as a gathering place where people connect. The cultural center. I've seen neighbors who haven't seen each other for 20 years connect at a cultural event here. Think about it. In an assisted living, they're connecting with someone they haven't seen in 20 years. I mean, there's so many stories.
So Lacey, where do I go with this? So I'm going to ask a couple questions, and I'm going to circle back and say, okay, if I wanted to do this, how would it look like? But the first thing that occurs to me is that it sounds like in order to make this happen, I'd need a bunch of other extra resources, including a big gathering space. So do I need to go add space, or how does that look?
That's a great question. Let's use the Scandinavian Living Center as an example. When we were building the Scandinavian Living Center, I had seen a project in Norway. And I was the last, I had visited over 60 places. I was in there for a couple of weeks. I was so young and naive. I was visiting 2 or 3 places a day. I was writing notes. I was exhausted. So by the time, it was literally the last day, and I had to drive 2 hours from Oslo. And I remember pulling up to this place called Foreman Center, which was in a city town called Sandefjord, and looking at the person next to me, I said, you know, let's just be kind. I see the balconies, I see, there's a lot to do with what I just said. But I said, I just want to be kind, say hello, and go home. I'm exhausted. I was homesick, the whole bit. I went into this place, and I was there for over 5 hours. I was inspired. It changed me because this place has 1,000 visitors a day. And the way they did it, and I'll do a comparison to the way we did it, they studied their town. What does this town need? Then they said, okay, let's add housing. So it's a different way of looking at it. They actually wanted the people to come, and they discovered, I think, for that town, for the 50-plus crowd, they needed a gathering place. So they had all these clubs, all these organizations meeting at this place. And then once they knew what they needed to have, conference rooms, auditorium maybe, whatever works for that community or that city or town. Well, I got excited about that. I was so excited about building the Scandinavian Living Center that we built 50% of our building is common space. So we have a big Nordic hall. If you go to our website, you can see that it's just a beautiful place for everything. You can have presentations there, movies, weddings, memorials, and then we have smaller rooms for other groups to come in here. Now we have today, and the mistake, it's not a mistake. I was just so excited. I had a board of directors that was made up of Scandinavians. When I would say to the Americans, this is what we need to do, they would push back. And my board would say to me, of course, this is common sense, because the reason why community-centered living is successful, and we've been successful, because everything we're using is common sense from Scandinavia. It's not a scientific formula, it's common sense. So when you gather people, connections, you and I have had our mistake connections, it can change a person's life. And when you build a senior or community center, and you build it in Kent over here, and then you build housing over here, that never made sense to me. Instead, you isolate a population that is important for every neighborhood and every community. When you say we need, what's the expression? You need a village or a neighborhood to raise your children, to raise us as adults. You lose that when you segregate elders. To be segregated is institutional thinking. I don't care how beautiful the building is. It doesn't make sense if the rest of the community is not coming. And so when okay, I'm sorry, I'm going off.
So let me ask a couple more questions relative to this. So the first question is the big question that everybody's going to be saying, if I were watching this and I were an owner or operator, for profit or not for profit, I would say this is a really cool idea. How the heck do I pay for it though? So do you charge for the use of the space, or what do you do? That's the question.
It's not a difficult question. That's a fun question. When I went to business school, because I felt like, I need to learn business, entrepreneurship, writing business plans. The most interesting thing is when you want to build something, the first thing I used to think of was the money. And I was taught the money's the last thing you think of. Because if you're putting a business plan together, or any project, you have to find out what the needs are. It doesn't matter what you want to do. If the community embraces it, this is not a developer raising money. This is a community raising money and embracing it. In the nonprofit world, we can dream about goals because nothing happens unless the community comes along. That's why community-centered living is targeted towards cities and towns. They need to embrace it because everyone has to work to make this happen. In a sense, you're the consumer, I'm the consumer. The developer could be a consumer. We almost have to put the oxygen mask on ourselves and be selfish. Do this for us, because what you're saying is, I can build anything and fill it up and house people, which sounds terrible. I'm going to house people. But what do you want? I want to be connected. I want my journey to continue. Our journey doesn't happen unless we connect with people along the way. Wrong telephone call, an accidental picking up the phone and talking to someone that changes the path of your life, that doesn't happen unless someone is there to talk to you. It could be a child saying something to an adult that changes the adult's thinking in life. So why would you take that formula or those ingredients for a successful journey out of the equation? So it's tricky because people are like, how do you pay for it? Well, you pay for it by putting a plan together that the community embraces, and there's always funding. There's always funding there, and that's the last part that you worry about. I never worried about it, and it happened.
So it's fine to say that. I'm going to push back on you a little bit on that. It's fine to say that, but so in the not-for-profit world, everybody's got different priorities, right? And because of your orientation of your community, you've already got this pre-programmed orientation. But I can pretty much guarantee that if you were to go to most not-for-profit boards and say, well, you should go do this, and I sit on a not-for-profit board, you should go do this, and they sort of look at you and say, you're nuts. We can't afford it. And then, of course, as you know, a ton of our senior living is for profit, and they're going to look at it and they're going to say, yeah, this is all great, but I still got to figure out how to pay for it because nobody's going to donate money to my for-profit senior living community.
Well, this is the thing. No one builds a project, nonprofit or for-profit, without doing the business plan.
That's
without
right.
doing the analysis. And we did that. But what happens, the thing you're adding to the equation is, I'm not just building housing. I'm building gathering opportunities. And the value of building gathering opportunities, and let's face it, I don't do it for marketing, but I have so many referrals because people are here. Over 2,000 people a month are here telling everyone else about what we're doing. The beauty of community-centered living is taking a good idea and developing what I call observational wisdom. You see something that's bad. I was put in a geriatric unit. It destroyed me. And I said, you can't have that. So that was a bad interaction. And community-centered living is not about protecting the connection. The good thing about community-centered living is for developers and everyone else in the community, once they start to see the gathering potential in nursing homes, assisted living, or independent housing, they're going to want that. So when you're a business, step back, nonprofit, for-profit, you're going to develop something that the community wants and needs because no one's going to pay for it unless they want it. Community-centered living is a slow and natural way of changing the way we look at housing. It stops being housing, it becomes gathering. And protecting our loved ones, you and I.
So a couple practical, so do you charge for use of the space? Do you make money off the space?
I have 25 to 30, I would say 30 organizations that use this as a hub. Okay. I have an outpatient key. No, of course, you have to. The use of space has to be rental, and we rent to a lot of nonprofits because that's who we are. But it doesn't matter who you rent to. A lot of families, people that get to know us now. In the beginning, I'll tell you, this is one of the obstacles, and it's a small one. People think when you gather people, it's a marketing gimmick, and it's not. See, the problem is you have to look at it as a gimmick. It's not going to work. You really have to be connected, and you have to believe in the value of gathering people. So I think I'm getting off track, and I apologize.
No. This is actually super helpful. So you're taking me where I want to go. So because I try to put myself in the mind of in the head of a developer, and as I'm sure you know, our goal at Senior Housing Forum is to help providers do a better job and to think about things in new ways. And part of my job in doing that is to say, okay, what if I were the CEO of Acme Senior Living and I was watching this interview with Joe, what would I want to know about it? And so that's sort of my role. But this is actually hugely helpful. So is this in a big town, a small town, or something else?
Newton, I think, is one of the first or second or thirds. Newton is a city, it's a very large city right outside of Boston.
Okay.
I would say it's one of the largest cities. So it's hard to explain. You have Boston and Newton's connected to it. It has 13 villages in Newton. It's a great community. But as far as Scandinavians, there's nobody here. We have about 30% that are Scandinavians, but that doesn't matter because people now understand the Scandinavian philosophy and they gather here. I would say to your CEOs, your boards, your nonprofits, the value of having people know about you without you going out there and pounding on them saying, look, we're a great place. You don't have to do that. It becomes known in the community. We actually had a developer in here, and this is what community center living does. The politicians, and I didn't hear about this till 2 or 3 weeks after the fact, politicians and neighbors started drilling the developer with questions like, are you going to have common space? And I don't think the developer understood what they were asking. And so finally someone said, you're going to be like the Scandinavian Living Center that opens it up to the community. And that's the beauty of community centered living. It takes a good project and changes the way we look at housing. So now there are people in the city of Newton that think, hey, wait a minute, that makes sense. Let's gather. It doesn't matter where we're gathering. And I'll be honest with you, when we started doing the cultural center and all these different programs, there was some questioning, like, why would someone come to an assisted living to go to a world performance? Of course, it's scary, but you have to understand, it's none of their business that we're in assisted living. That sounds awful. I'm not even promoting. I stopped promoting the Scandinavian Living Center years ago. I promote gathering opportunities. And then the magic happens. One of the obstacles is the staff you need to train. I didn't have a book. I didn't have this book for them to read. They've all read it now. They understand what community-centered living is all about. But when we were first starting out, we had all this space. And that was probably, I wish we had done it differently. I wish we had really focused on the needs. In the back of my mind, I had a Scandinavian board of directors. I knew that we were going to create gathering opportunities. And what I would suggest to everyone, find out what the needs and wants are. I just took a chance. I said, we're going to develop all the space, and we're going to invite people in until they get it. So if I can share a couple of quick stories. One of my favorites is around a yo-yo. My marketing director would come to me and say, we have to do a blood pressure clinic because we were trying to open up the center and share it with the community. And I would say, I'd rather do a yo-yo show. And I was kidding, tongue in cheek, but that was my way of saying, I don't want to do that. Let's do financial planning as you get older. No, I'd rather do a yo-yo show. And the point I was trying to make is let them go see those shows about aging and dying somewhere else. We're not. We're about living. We're continuing the journey. So I would say, I'd rather do a yo-yo show. Well, this wonderful person, clever, because she'll probably listen to this, she discovered a couple on David Letterman's show doing yo-yo tricks. And believe me, I had and so she just said, well, Joe, we're going to do a yo-yo show. And I said, great, we'll give Dunkin' yo-yos away to all the kids. We sold out. We had to turn people away because we just couldn't. It was just amazing. Parents, children's grandparents. Now, this is what happened. This is a transformation for me. I had an older gentleman. He must have been in his 60s or 70s, came with 2 little girls. And unknown to us, he was a Duncan yo-yo champion when he was a child. So he came with the yo-yo. He started showing his tricks in front of the children. Now, look at what I saw was a transformation of children looking at their, not elderly people, elders. And that's what community-centered living is all about. It's redefining aging. We're calling ourselves elders, not elderly people. Elders, the people with all the wisdom and the talent. We're going back to that. So that was exciting for me to see. He actually got on stage. They lit a match in his ear with the yo-yo. And it was an incredible show. But here's the other thing. A good friend of mine, Tor, he had to be in his late 90s or mid 90s. He was all excited about going to the show. I'm like, okay. He was a carpenter, a very talented carpenter. He had made a yo-yo when he was 8 years old, a wooden yo-yo. And he came to the show with the wooden yo-yo.
Is that right? That's cool.
Children. And that yo-yo was, I should have brought it with me because he's since passed away and his friends gave it to me because they knew this yo-yo was a big deal to me. But that yo-yo was better than all the brand new yo-yos I was giving away. It was amazing. That's the day that I saw the value of community-centered living in a way that it transformed elderly into elders. And that doesn't happen unless you expose children, young adults to elders, people that can give back to you. That's the thing we've lost. We need to continue that journey in life, you and I, as we age. And it doesn't happen unless we still have those good or bad connections with humans. Community-centered living is a way of gathering all of us. So for the business person out there, wouldn't it be great not to market your facility, but to market the gatherings, the opportunities for a cultural center? And that's the thing. We have, here's another one. We have a nonprofit organization, the village movement across the country.
Yep.
Right, the Beacon Village. I have the Newton Village that's decided to come here and rent space here. So their headquarters are right here, along with an outpatient PT. And this is a fun story. People would say to me, and their mission, is to keep people out of my facility and all the other facilities.
That's right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
All right. So they came here, people like, what? Why would you do that, Joe? They're kind of going against what you're trying to do. And I said, well, I think when you're creating unlimited options for aging, it doesn't matter. You don't stop to think. You think about helping everyone, because I think the village movement is a great option. I think nursing homes can be a great option if it's done right. I don't hate nursing homes. I love what they try to do, but they just need to be better. Assisted living, they're all good options. Well, they came in here, and I'm not exaggerating. I had a resident, it was 100, and she lived to be 106. And she decided to volunteer for this group because they're made up of volunteers. Her job at 101, 102 was to call this 87-year-old elder in a community that was isolated. She was checking up on him every day to make sure he was okay. So think about that. Someone living in an assisted living, checking on someone independently in the community to make sure they're safe. That's the magic here. I don't predict this stuff. It just happens. I see it and I'm saying, I never thought of that.
So talk to me a little bit about. I mean, I love these stories. They're amazing stories. So talk to me about the kinds of space you actually have in the building. So do you have an auditorium? Do you have conference rooms? What do you have?
All of it. We have 50% of this building is made up of common space. And the way it's designed, it's taken from the Danish model. Single loaded corridors, you can walk around. It's like an indoor track. People can do 13 around is a mile. And in those areas, you have sitting areas for family and residents and things they can sit. There's lots of sunrooms. Then we have an auditorium, the Nordic Hall, that plays movies. Once a month, the Scandinavian Library, which is another tenant here. It's a public library. They play movies to the community, and 50, 60 people come, sometimes over 100, because we have what we call the Kaffeestugan open every Saturday. So we have a cafe. We have an area where the public can gather. So on Saturdays, they go to this cafe, pop-up cafe, and they can sit in there. They can have their sandwiches or snacks. We also have, as you mentioned, conference rooms. We have private dining rooms where people can have meetings. We have a group that comes here to learn Spanish, but I also have a group that comes here to learn Norwegian. It doesn't matter as long as it makes sense for people to gather. Someone said to me, well, sorry, Steve, I know you want to say something. Let me just throw this out. Someone said, Joe, what is success for you when it comes to the residents? And I say, well, if one resident goes to one program, that's successful. And they look at me and I said, well, wait a minute though. But if there's one person isolated in our place or in the community, that's a failure. I said, it's the same thing. It's all about creating connections. So maybe one resident will benefit, but maybe 5 people in the community will benefit from those community connections. Sorry, go ahead, I'll stop.
Okay, so the other question I have that probably people wouldn't ask, but I think that sort of sits in the back of people's mind is, do you worry about having all these strangers wandering through your building all the time from a security standpoint?
That's a great question. I'm an American, and I'll use an example. I was in a nursing home. I mean, Denmark, just so you know, Denmark, they're way ahead of everybody. All their nursing homes, I mean, they were the poorer of all the Scandinavian countries, but they somehow created these nursing homes with all studios, patios, and balconies. Well, it's the balcony that I saw as an American. And I said, well, you know, I can't believe I said this. This is because I'm an American. I said, are you not concerned? I said to the administrator that someone's going to jump off the balcony. Because I'm thinking worst case scenario.
Right.
And he looked at me, and this is where the autonomy principle came into my head. He said, you know, Joe, that's their choice. Boom, that's it. If they decide to do that, we're not going to stop them. So I kind of look at that and I say, you know, the thing about community-centered learning is everyone has to take responsibility. This is not about promoting autonomy with the residents. It's about promoting autonomy with you and me, taking responsibility to participate. And there are bad apples everywhere. We have security cameras. People do silly things like knock lamps down and run away. You know, they do that, but you don't stop a good thing because of those bad apples.
Gotcha.
It's not about focusing on the bad apples. It's about focusing on what's good for the community, because you can't prevent that, and you can't stop and tie yourself up because you want to protect everybody, because we are protecting everybody. We have the security cameras. They have to go through one door. And yes, do I think about stuff like that? Yeah, because there's crazy people, there's crazy family members, there's crazy everybody. And I apologize for using the word crazy, but there's bad apples.
Right.
No one's crazy, human. Yeah.
I don't know.
So I hope that helps.
So,
crazy works? Okay.
Yeah. Well, listen, one more question for you. If somebody wanted to come visit, can they?
Oh, absolutely. They can come, they can make an appointment and we can give them a tour, or they can just come to a program. There's about 30 different things, different organizations that utilize this place. So it's open. Obviously, they can't come after hours.
Sure.
But they're welcome to come here and experience it. I would say come on a Saturday. Think about that, a Saturday, the weekends, it's the busiest day here.
Yeah.
And experience seeing all these people.
Cool. Well, listen, this is a great story. I love this, and I appreciate your spending some time talking to me about this. And I want to come back.